Hey everyone, welcome back. Hope you had a good pause and that you enjoyed these small informative videos. And many of them which in fact relate very much to what we're going to talk about. So it's not only authoritarian state, but it's also about authoritarianism and then transition processes. And this is video number 2 in this. First part, we will deal about what we have seen in the last many years, particularly the last 20 years. It's about the rise of national populist parties. And you can see, in Denmark we have, in fact, you can see Denmark, and then there's the Danish People Party, which in fact had it start in the early 70s, when it was the Progress Party or the Future Party, and which was to some extent also partly a libertarian party. It was about when the leader at the time, which was a lawyer, a famous lawyer, and then suddenly a lawyer who was standing in television saying, oh, that he paid 0% in tax, and everyone should do it. Well, why to pay taxes? And then it made really the political establishment. We had a right-wing government, coalition government at the time, and it was really shaking the government what to do with this. And he was very good in communicating, but also when he started the party, he was also under investigation of a lot of cheating in relation to taxes. But he was very good in talking, and then about he had some very populistic views, saying military defense. This was during the Cold War. Then he said, dismantle the military. We don't need the military, just a telephone. So if the Soviet Union they are coming, we just the telephone can answer saying, "Oh, we're giving up. You just come." And of course, people found it very amusing. But there was also dissatisfaction with at that time we only had 5 really parties in parliament. Dissatisfaction with them. So he came into parliament with almost 10% of the vote, which was in fact a lot at the time. And it was based on this because there was a lot of, it was an anarchic party in many ways. And in the end, he also came, he was in prison due to his financial doings. And then he turned to, with immigration, onto middle of 80s, we hardly had any immigrants. We were extremely homogeneous. And at that time, we got a very liberal immigration law in relation to refugees. So suddenly it increased. We had a small guest workers coming to Denmark, but then suddenly they were also given opportunities to bring their families. So it increased. So from hardly having anybody, today it's about 5 or 6% of the population which is coming from that kind of immigration. So from having the same, and many come from Muslim countries, so from having almost 0%, we did now have 4 or 5% of the population which are said to be Muslims. But it's not only in Denmark. They had the party in Front National in France, which is in fact very big, getting 15 to 20% of the vote. United Kingdom, they had the Independence Party. They also had some extreme party, but they're not big. Then they had the Progressive Party in Norway, which used to look like Danish People Party. Because what happened with Danish People Party is also from the late 90s, it changed it from being a very only right-wing party. Then it changed to become a very populistic party. And then the rhetoric was about immigration. So even at that time, 20 years ago, we didn't have so much immigrant. It was still, everything was dealing with immigrant. And then for 10 years, they were, we had minority governments, but they were depending on this party. So every time, very often, we changed the immigration laws. So, and it's a lot of the changes was very of symbolic character, but it did And then, in fact, we have had a lot of immigration anyway, because then if you're going to have a good work in Denmark, then you could come from almost every country in the world, as long as you had a good contract there. And we have had a lot of people coming in to Denmark and stay in Denmark that way. And in Sweden, we have this very democratic. Yeah, but I think I would say about the Danish Danish People Party was also that it changed. So it took a lot of the agenda of the Social Democratic Party, which also had these, how to say, the authoritarian votes of the Social Democratic Party. That was many of those who former workers who were being threatened by immigration, but also globalization. The elite didn't care, because many of the immigrants, they didn't stay where the elite they were living. So, and then you have similar parties, the True Finns in Austria, the Freedom Party also. So, and then you can see, I just put the thing, the party, the Danish People Party, you can see they got 12% of the vote in 2001. But that was only one thing, because what they did was in 2016, election 2016, 15, they got 20% of the vote. But that was partly because, yeah, but they were popular, and they were, for 10 years, they've been supporting a right-wing government, and they were capable of getting their symbolic all the time. So they, in the one way, they were both supporting the government, and then they were opposition party. And that was the way they were capable of selling to the people. But then in 2015, they got 20% of the vote, became the second biggest party in parliament. And then they could have taken the reign or become part of the government, but they didn't want, they stayed out. And then we had a liberal or a right-wing government. It calls itself the Liberal Party in Denmark, but that is not in the US way, but it's in the economy way. That's a Liberal Party, and it's very much supported by the Farmers Party. It used to be the Farmers Party, but we hardly have any farmers today. But the reason for they got 20% was, in fact, also because the leader of the biggest right-wing party from the Liberal Party, again, European Liberal Party, he was so unpopular, and he was even among his own. So therefore, was also, they got a lot of dissatisfaction votes. But then with the election in 2019, last year, then they were halved. They lost 50% of all the votes, the Danish People Party. And partly is also because I think people were dissatisfied with them because they had opportunity to take responsibility, and they didn't. They tried to do what they had done before when there was a right-wing government. And then also the Social Democrats have won a lot of the votes back from the Danish People's Party. So a lot of these, how to say, authoritarianism among the population back. So, but you can read all what is in here about from Europe about this nationalist populist party. You also have them in Italy. The last 10 years, you also have them in Germany. AfDP, something, yeah, which is in fact covering many more extreme people. The Danish People Party has become, in fact, a little bit more ordinary and become more and more, how to say, a right-wing social democratic party, because economically it's a social democratic party. But now, the last election, we got an even more extreme political party, which is more harsh on immigration. I don't know how that can be, but without hurting the economy very much. And then it is And then we got really an extremist, and he got in fact 1.5% of the vote, or 1.8, and you need 2% of the vote in order to get 4 seats in parliament. So that was extremely close, and he is provocative, doing everything in order to provoking everyone, and it's really undermining the political system that we have. It's very polemic also. And so that is as I told you many times before, the slides you will get, and you can see them in Canvas. So you'll have more time to see it. So it's about populism. We saw the rise of the populist party. And you also, I didn't mention about Poland, where they in fact they are in power, in Hungary, where they also are in power, and then definition, populist democracy, you have democratic liberal, anti-corruption, authoritarian populist, that's anti-liberal. Then you have anti-democratic libertarian. We don't really have libertarian in Europe. And anarcho-liberal groups, that's only a small groups, intellectual groups in our part of the world. The state is very central. It's again, I'm trying to sometimes to talk about how do we see the state, and I'm related to a philosopher, a German philosopher and journalist who wrote a book 30 years ago where he went to different part of Europe, and then how different the countries were. Then he went to Italy, and then he said, yeah, but in Italy, people live despite the state. The state is a pain in a certain point of the body, which is very high if you are picking up strawberry. And then, so you do all the way. It's waste of money and pay taxes, and there's no services and things like that. Things that happen a lot in Italy since then. But that was, and then you can go. He went to Sweden also, and then you can go to Sweden where the state is you have so much trust in the state. So in fact, you put some of the state out of democratic control. In fact, a little bit, it's what we see here during the Corona crisis, where the health authorities has a lot of discretion to take, how to say, professional views. So this is our scientific views, and it's not political views. And that's in Sweden. And then you have Denmark, where the state, we have a lot of trust in the state, but you have to control it. So we are both, and that's also in fact how we are dealing with the Corona crisis, where there's no doubt when it's political decisions which are made, and in fact the health authorities is also saying when it's political decisions and when it's based on their, how to say, scientific judgment or professional judgment. And it's also because it is a gray line related to these things. So some of these professional judgments, they are in fact also political. So it's really a gray area. But it's interesting to see the state in that perspective. Then you have authoritarian populism, non-populist, non-authoritarian, European consensus, social democrat, socialist, Christian, different kind of political parties. Then authoritarian, fascist, we have had it in Europe, and we still have some tendency among some of the extreme right-wing groups, but they are relatively small still. Then we have Trotskyist. I don't know whether we ever have had you could call Soviet Union some of the first years until he went in exile. Then we have the populist, authoritarian, non-authoritarian, anti-corruption parties. We have some of these movements in many of these countries. We have and now they're part in government in Spain, Podemos. To some extent, we may have the Green in some countries. We have the five-star party in Italy, which is now, in fact, constituting part of the government. I think that's we have then in Denmark. There's a few, but they are not really big. They didn't make it to parliament. Then we have right-wing populist and left-wing populist. See, it's always gray. You can say authoritarian, whether Podemos is authoritarian or non-authoritarian. I would say they were non-authoritarian, but it's very much about you have to go into to study the different party. Authoritarian, then it is in fact smaller groups who are deciding everything, and they are very much about people are grassroots oriented, and the same with the party in Italy. But you do have Lega Nord in Italy also, as you have the Danish People Party, the Futurist Party, and things like that. But they are 10 years ago or 20 years ago, you hardly saw them. Yeah. Here you can see the average share of votes for populist parties to 1980 2018. And I don't know, sometimes it's about the political development in Denmark happens sometimes it takes place earlier than in other places, because as I told you already in 73 we had this revolution in the Danish political party system, as party system with 5 major parties who have been controlling everything or dividing the power, shifted in to be governing since the 30s. And then in 73 it was really a big revolt which took place at that time, which led to some of the political the populist party. And then in fact now we could see that the average share of the populist party, because in 1915, as I told you, they got 20% of the vote, and now they are down to 10. And then a small, even more right-wing party came in. They had 2%, so it's 12% of the vote. So perhaps it is now it's going down. It's about how it's sometimes it's also with the pendulum, how it swings in relation to politics. Change and result. You can see the different countries. That was the election in 2000. The last election in 2018. And you can see how they gain. In Sweden, it's very interesting that none of the parties would like to cooperate or in any way with the Swedish Democrats, not in any way. So therefore, but it took a long time in order to form a government, because without Swedish Democrats, then the two blocks, they were just as big. Here the populist party, here they call the leftist party in Sweden. One can discuss whether they are a populist party. Fidesz in Hungary, they have the majority, 60% of the vote. Jobbik, they got a little bit down, but paid to Fidesz, it seems, and they are even more extreme than Fidesz. There is a strong old nationalist, revanchist in Hungary, which is from the time when Hungary was a huge state. It was part of the time also, it was part of the Austria-Hungary empire. And then you have in Latvia, you have also a party which went back and another one which came, and they were really dangerous also because they were in that way reducing freedom of speech and the media. The same is taking place in Hungary. Then you have in Italy, you have the Lega, who is really big, and it could continue to become big, or MSS also, which is in fact coming out of the fascist party in Italy. It's going to be interesting to see what's happening there in the next election. See, the government they are having now, constituting of PSD and the Five Star Movement, seemingly they just want to keep it as long as possible, because now it seems that that the extreme right-wing party would have a total majority if they come into election, and they will, if there was an election today, and also with the coronavirus, I think. Yes, Danish People Party is not there. It was only election in 2019. And here you can see the differences, how it, you can see Denmark, the increases from 2008 to 2018. So it really increased a lot from 15 to, I think 15% of the vote to almost 20% of the vote. So it really increased also there. But in Hungary, of course, it's a tendency when you get the power and then you're not having free election, then of course you can increase more and more. But you can see more or less all the countries, they are having their share of extreme political parties. Except, one can see one interesting exception is Ireland. And Estonia, with not very little. But the UK, that's partly due to the system, which makes it very difficult for extremist party to win it, and so people, they don't want to vote for them because they know they don't have a chance. So this is increasing, so it's close to 16%. As you saw in one of the videos, it's about, one say about 20% of the population, some a little more, some a little less, that their population is very authoritarian and leaning. And then the radical left is also increasing, and it is the very left parties in Europe here, including in Denmark, they have increased. So they are having about 10% of the vote, no, 9% of the vote. But it's also, one also have to say that these parties, for instance, if it's about Denmark, has also changed a lot from being very dogmatic to become very pragmatic, to emphasize the personal freedoms. They are in fact the most extreme supporters of a rule of law in relation to personal freedom. In fact, fighting the state. So in a way, the Danish radical left is also, it's not seeing the state as a solution to everything. Here some democratic transition requires 3 different components. So it's going from authoritarian regime to a democracy. In the old days, people in the 50s, 60s, it was a linear process because this was the way it's going to develop. Also after the Second World War, and with human rights being formalized internationally. So it's just to get things going that way. So it requires 3 components: end of an authoritarian regime, installation of new democratic true elections, the consolidation of this regime. And then it's put up in different ways, from how you have unstable democracy, and you'll have it in the beginning and then later unstable. There's a lot of discussions also in the articles you have read for today about whether, when you leave authoritarianism, whether you should do it slowly or you should do it quickly and radically, and that's a good discussion. It's again, in democracies, it is, if you have a democracy and you have the election, then if you want to do something radical, you shall do it just when you're into power. That's a historical experience from Denmark. It's doing it in the power, and then you become more moderate over time. But then people have forgot the radical things that you did in the beginning, which could in fact be costly for quite many people. In one way, how to say, on non-populist decisions. radical reform of the economy, of the labor market, or whatever. Huntington, 3 types of democratization. Powerholders take the lead and bring about replacement. Then it's opposition group take the lead and bring about democracy. And transplant when there's a joint action by the government and opposition groups to promote democratization. Huntington had been dealing a lot about democracy and democratic transformation. Democratization from authoritarian rule to democracy in 4 phases. Political liberalization, process of liberalization, reform of authoritarian regime, collapse of authoritarian regime, democratic transition, change to formal democracy most often initiated by multi-party watershed election. That can happen also, yeah. And then consultation. It's embedded within the society. But part of the consolidation is, as we discussed earlier, is also in fact that it continued to develop itself. Sometimes it's about what you had in 1848. It's not all of it which is valid in 2020. But in fact, the Danish constitution is, the core of it is still from 1848. And it's not very long, in fact, the Danish constitution, and some broad how things should be. And the only times we have changed it in the last 50 years has been due to give up sovereignty in relation to the EU. And then we changed the laws in relation to the ruler. In 53, we permitted a female head of state. That's why we have the queen now. In the last time, it's also in order to get people to vote, because you need more than 60% of the votes, and at least 40% of the population had to vote in a referendum in order to make change. So there it was about to change the law so that it was the firstborn who will be the queen or the crown. Because in 53 it was just, if there's no male heir to the throne, then it will be the male. Then will be a woman. Otherwise, if there was smaller brother who was a male, he will be the king. So that made that there was sufficient amount of votes in the referendum to make changes. Second wave of the community. First wave, it's the American Revolution, French Revolution, democracies in Europe, Costa Rica. Then you have the second wave of democratization, and that is part of decolonization. It lasted more than, because there was a lot of countries were decolonized in the 60s. Then third wave of decolonization, that is the collapse of communists in the Eastern Bloc, and in fact the collapse of the military regimes in Latin America. The fourth wave, since 2010, MENA region, Asia, I will start with a positive note, and I would say, and it is really underestimated, and that is South Korea. I mentioned before, but South Korea is amazing. I was studying it in the early 80s. It has the military rule. It was authoritarian, but also with a very nationalistic on the developing the country. So it was not really for personal enrichment. In fact, it was similar, in fact, to Japan and later on to China and also to Taiwan. So it was not for personal, but it was for making the country strong. And then looking at 2020, where you have a high percentage who are voting, people involved. So when they had really a bad president some years ago who was looking more into, I was going to say the witch doctor, but it was so in a way than following, in fact, the rules or following expertise or science, then she was taken off the post, which is very, very, very difficult, and it should also be very, very, very difficult. They have a vibrant civil society. They have at the same time saying, oh, they have made it fantastic in very few years. It's a very rich country also today. Very ready. And at the same time, every time they are opening for instance, they are doing, one of the countries doing the best when we have this so-called PISA test, where you measure educational merits from country to country, then they are on the top. Denmark is also very far up, but far from South Korea. But then when they but they also study. They study from 8 o'clock in the morning to 11 o'clock in order to make the exams for coming into university. They are really, but it's also they hate. So they really dislike. So they are very good in the PISA test, but regarding whether they enjoy going to school, they don't like it. And and in Denmark, it's very much about, it's about that the kids, they shall like to go to school also. They shall like learning to learn. So they have a lot of the state of have sent a lot of people also to Denmark in order to find out, oh, what are we doing differently that we can have this, in fact, fairly strong economy. And then we have this educational system which is not doing so bad in the PISA, but very good in that the kids are satisfied. So and then we have the MENA region. Oh no, it's where that would be the next. We'll have it later. I'll talk about the MENA region later. Process of transformation, the process, political regime, so you can have different social modernization, development, civil society. That's how you transform a political system, social system, civic system. So how it affects all the different, so it's not only political, but also the social and the civic system, which is affected by the transformation in order to get a strong democracy. And it goes all the way from the political institution down to the citizens and voters. And the same in the social system, social actors and holders at the micro level, social networks. And Denmark is very much about, also I told you about these associations, freedom associations. We are proliferating. Every time there's an issue, then we make an association. And it's so simple to make a formal association. You just go to the internet, then you get a company number or association number, and then of course you have to follow different rules. If you get money, you have to account for it and things like that. But it's very liberal in relation to, and we see that it's one of the strengths of. So even though we have fewer members of political parties, then we have more and more people who are involved in political work in relation to the civil society. Failure democratization in the MENA, yeah, it's terrible, terrible, terrible. And now you come from the United States, and I would say that the governments of the United States is partly to blame for this. It's been with the war in Iraq, which catapulted so many other things, which is in a way, because it was also, it was in one way, it was about oil, but then ideologically, it was also about expand democracies. It was after 9/11. Iraq was not part of 9/11. They did not have weapons of mass destruction, despite that US went in together with Denmark, the coalition of the willing. And then it spread also, but because there was also dissatisfaction in the Arabic states, because there was they were left behind in development. There was and there was UNDP had made a big report about failing educational standard, failing also as literature, media, science, and so things had to change in relationship. And then there was If there's something they have a lot of, that's Jute, because they are increasing population in all the countries, and in some of the countries increasing very heavily. So there was a push for changes. So you have this Arabic Spring, and there was so much hope. And I worked with the human rights at the time, fantastic times, and more were permitted, and it was a focus. But then there were setbacks in all the countries. In Egypt, they did have elections, but then Islamist party, they won. And then, in fact, the military and the former regime, they made a counter-revolution. And then, in fact, the US accepted this counter-revolution. Egypt is getting, it's the second biggest, or it used to be at least, I think also still it is, the second biggest receiver of assistance from the US. Israel is the biggest. So one could say that Bush, he unlashed the forces of democracy, and then during Obama, in fact, they didn't dare to secure. It could also be that these Islamists, they didn't want to give up. They were going to undermine the democracy was supposed to come. But we also have Turkey, where at that time it looked much more positive than today about merging Islam with some sort of a democratic development. But that is also on Erdogan. And today it's only Tunisia, which is in fact, it's a really success story. Tunisia is also a little bit different. It's a smaller countries, more educated countries, very close relationship to France. But they had an authoritarian regime for years, where they tried different development paths. Even at the time, it was a socialist development path. They had the name in the country, so it was the socialist country of Tunisia. But even though it was not far from, they already left the socialist policy at that time. And then Libya, that was the latecomer, where Gaddafi, he held on to power. And then, in fact, some Arabic countries, they started supporting the Arabic Spring also in that country, and played on the contradiction between in Benghazi and with the people in Tripoli. And that was really a mess. But then it was a time where the first really time with humanitarian intervention. In fact, there was some sort of a policy of humanitarian intervention that when things was really, really bad, we could not just stay outside and look at it, as we have done in Yugoslavia and Rwanda. In fact, we had to act. So here, humanitarian intervention. We could say we did that in that means the NATO did it in Kosovo Serbia crisis. But that was without the UN support. So in fact, it was illegal from international law, which again, then Russia has really used that step later on in securing areas where there was Russian-dominated populations, Crimea, Georgia, and Crimea, peninsula of Ukraine. And in Libya, it was then, it has been a mess afterwards also, and there's some proxy wars between different countries about who's going to control it. And it's terrible. It's a small country, misruled for years under Gaddafi. It was, as I said, development without a plan. I had the opportunity to visit just after Gaddafi was toppled. And for that reason, I had difficulties in coming into the United States. I cannot automatically come in. I have to do something more about it, because I have to state that I have been in Libya after 2000, or in 2011. It was a very interesting time. And then you have Algeria and Morocco. I think Morocco, it's more democratic. It's a autocracy restricted. It's more democratic with ruler, but a more open and free press. And Algeria is also improving after a terrible regime where it's about suppressing the Islamist groups very much. It was very dangerous in the 90s to stay in Algeria. And Sudan, they have autocracy, and it has been separated into South Sudan and Sudan. But it's also about these wars in Sudan. It's also about how other are also involving, and that's also because they will have an interest in division of the country. So with oil in South Sudan, it's same in Libya. They have a lot of oil in the underground, so therefore there's a lot of people who would like to play a role, have their share. Iraq is green. Let's see how long time it will be green. And Syria it's a mess. They had a very authoritarian regime, suppressive regime. Torture was really used, but it was another way a very peaceful regime with a lot of different ethnic groups. That sometimes again, when you take in democracies, then because when you have these regimes, then there's also peace and there's some sort of a balance between the different groups. But when you have democracy, as we saw in Eastern Europe, in the former Soviet Union, then it becomes very national, and then you hit on the minority groups because you cannot offer people so much economic or political and economic freedom. So you need to find some scapegoats. And in Syria, it has been controlled by a small minority, a small religious. I forgot the name of that group, and that's the family of Assad, and then they are dominating the army also. But it is again here during the Syria they have a different minorities, Christian minorities, Muslim minorities, Alevit, that was the group's name. That's the Alevites, which is hardly known outside Syria. And so that is, again, if there had been a majority rule, and if that was more probably it was a more Islamistic government, then it could alter the situation in Syria for the minority. That's in fact happened in Pakistan when the military needed during al-Haq, then it became an Islamist state, and then there has been a lot of push on minority religions. That means Christian, Muslim sect, and Hindus, in fact, and Sikhs. So there was in fact a lot of Sikhs and Hindus still living in that country. And then one could say what happened in Yemen. They also tried with democracy. Otherwise, they have authoritarian regimes in both North and South Yemen, but then which merge. But then it collapsed, and then Saudi Arabia and Iran have been playing the game and poor. Then Palestinian territories, that could also be called a false state, but it's not recognized by all the countries. I was there the first time in 2000. I said, "Oh, that's terrible," and it has just become worse. Also, the way that the West Bank and Gaza are being squeezed and squeezed and squeezed, and then the governments in these two areas is left no space to operate. But that's another discussion. Yes, so that's all for this time. Remember, governing system is not a linear process ending with democracy. It can go up and down. Even democracy have to develop, adjust to social, like technological development to survive, to be useful, or to be. Otherwise, it's not worth having it. If it's not serving its purpose, then the relationship between state and individual is extremely relevant with the technical, particularly with the technological development. It's again, we have this government who can control us in all over, all the time. And then personally, I would like to have the freedoms where we in fact are controlling the states regarding these controls, and not like in China. And in both, and as you saw in one of the videos, is about relating to Snowden's, when he laid open that in fact how the US government was in fact sneak listening into all of us. Now in Europe, they made some precautions so that all our internet data will not pass by United States before they go back to Europe. But that's really dangerous. Otherwise, we'll be eventually be looking more and more like China in relation to regime, and getting further away from democracy or real democracy. Yes, let's see. Simon, thanks. Have a good weekend. See you on Monday. And assignment, I have a small assignment for you, which I will write into the paper, which will be which you can find also in Canvas, and it's just to check whether you have read stuff, and that's because I cannot control you in relation to participation, or to check you out saying, oh, you participated today. And see you on Monday. I really look forward to you, and I hope that by the end of the day I have 4 volunteers who see the big interest in becoming in getting feedback from your fellow students. So have a good weekend. Here it is still sunny. We haven't had rain for I don't know how long time. Oh.